Hello and welcome to this special edition of Vantage. We are at the Dubai City Expo. Day 2 of the COP28 Climate Summit is about to conclude. It's been an eventful day. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi attended the talks today. He emphasized on climate financing, on the need for rich countries to foot the bill. Meanwhile, day 1 saw an agreement on a new loss and damages fund. Again, it's about the money. Developed nations have promised some donations. But we'll tell you why their promises just don't cut it. Plus, how is this COP summit different from the others? We know the scale is massive. Tonight, we'll bring you the numbers. All this and more lined up. But first, the headlines. Geopolitical tensions boil over at the COP28 summit in Dubai. Iranian delegates walk out of the climate conference over Israel's presence. Polish, Latvian and Lithuanian presidents refuse to pose for a group photo. They were angry over the presence of Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. Hungarian Prime Minister proposes an EU-Ukraine partnership instead of a membership. Since the Ukraine war began, Viktor Orban is the only EU leader to maintain close ties with Russia. Hungary has threatened to stop aid to Ukraine and has blocked Kiev's bid to join the EU. A Madagascar court declares President Andry Rajoelina as the winner of last month's elections. It rejects the opposition's claims of fraud. In the November elections, Rajoelina secured 59% of the vote, but the turnout was barely 46%. He first came to power in a coup in 2009. The space race heats up. South Korea set to launch its first military spy satellite tomorrow on a SpaceX rocket. Last month, North Korea launched its first military eye in the sky. And 2 Kiwi birds born in New Zealand's capital for the first time in over a century. It comes a year after the national bird was reintroduced to Wellington. The flightless Kiwi is one of the most vulnerable birds in New Zealand. It is day 2 of the COP28 summit. We are here at the Dubai Expo City where the summit is happening. It's a big day here. You can feel the energy in the air. There's a rush for climate action. Today, leaders at COP28 met to decide what the future of climate action will look like. Some of them have given the summit a miss, like Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Joe Biden. It's ironic given that these countries are the biggest polluters in the world. But the others are here. There's UK's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, Brazilian President Lula da Silva, Kenyan President William Ruto and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He arrived in Dubai yesterday for a short 21-hour visit with a packed schedule. There were 2 speeches today, 7 bilaterals and 2 special climate events. Prime Minister Modi said when it comes to climate action, India has walked the talk.
Friends, आज भारत ने इकोलॉजी और इकोनॉमी के उत्तम संतुलन का उदाहरण विश्व के सामने रखा है। भारत में विश्व की 17% आबादी होने के बावजूद ग्लोबल कार्बन एमिशंस में हमारी हिस्सेदारी ओनली 4% से भी कम है। भारत विश्व की उन कुछ इकोनॉमीज में से एक है जो एनडीसी टारगेट्स को पूरा करने की राह पर है।
You heard him. India accounts for 17% of the global population. But when it comes to emissions, we account for less than 4%, which places India in a unique position, a position of leadership. India is the world's 5th largest economy. It has emerged as the voice of the global south. It is bearing the brunt of climate change, but also leading with climate action. India even offered to host the COP33 summit in 2028.
Friend, Bharat यूएन फ्रेमवर्क फॉर क्लाइमेट चेंज प्रोसेस के प्रति प्रतिबद्ध है। इसलिए आज मैं इस मंच से 2028 में COP33 में COP33 समिट को भारत में होस्ट करने का प्रस्ताव भी रखता हूं।
Now, this is not a well-known fact, but India has hosted a COP summit before. It was the COP8 summit. But COP summits then were a low-key affair. Only climate experts and ministers attended. It was a different time. The world was just waking up to the dangers of climate change. But now the blinkers are off. Alarm bells are ringing, and they're ringing hard, which is why India has assumed an assertive stance in the last few years. At COP21, New Delhi pledged to cut greenhouse emissions, and it has. India has cut emissions by 33% in just 14 years. At COP26, India also announced its target to reach net zero emissions by 2070, a target that Prime Minister Modi reiterated this time as well.
हमारा लक्ष्य 2030 तक एमिशंस इंटेंसिफाई को 45% घटाना है। हमने तय किया है कि नॉन फॉसिल फ्यूल का शेयर हम बढ़ाकर 50% करेंगे और हम 2070 तक नेट जीरो के लक्ष्य की तरफ भी बढ़ते रहेंगे।
At the same COP26, India also launched the International Solar Alliance, a global solar grid. What does it look like? Basically, the sun is always shining in some part of the world. It will produce solar energy. If countries are connected by one grid, they can transfer that power to each other. Simple yet effective. This year at COP28, the Indian Prime Minister launched the Green Credit Initiative. It is focused on creating a carbon sink. How does that work? By encouraging participation of people. India also lauded the COP28 summit this year. The Prime Minister said India and the UAE share a similar vision, calling the nation a partner in a green and sustainable future. So instead of selling false dreams, India is leading at COP summits with concrete plans. It is collaborating with nations like the UAE. It is setting achievable goals and launching initiatives that are not just on paper. Unfortunately, COP summits are more about talk and less about action. This, as you know, is the 28th edition of COP. So there have been 27 before. There will be many more in the future, but they tend to follow the same trajectory. The rich overpromise, the poor nations wait for reparations, speeches are applauded, there is political haggling, and in the end, all we have is a statement that no one really abides by. That's not how you tackle climate change. Climate action is the need of the hour, and India is leading the way with its actions. Which brings us to the summit itself. And if you know Dubai, you know they go the extra mile. The city has a thing for records. They have the world's tallest building, the Burj Khalifa, the world's biggest shopping mall, the Dubai Mall, and now they're hosting the biggest COP summit in history. So let's look at this event purely through numbers. "190 nations are participating. 70,000 delegates are expected to attend, including 140 world leaders. So COP28 is breaking some records, good and bad. Yes, this is the biggest COP summit in history, but the carbon footprint is also massive. Even if all delegates fly commercial, they'll account for 210,000 tons of carbon dioxide. Plus, there are private jets. World leaders and some corporate bigwigs use their own jets, which means even more emissions. So travel alone could account for 80% of the conference's emissions. The United Nations is calling COP28 a reality check. The focus is on one figure, 1.5 degrees Celsius. The threshold set in Paris prevent the Earth from heating by 1.5 degrees Celsius. But progress has been abysmal. The world has already warmed by 1.3 degrees Celsius. We could hit 1.5 in the next 6 years. So the world needs urgent action. Climate change is already bleeding the economy. Global losses stand at $4.3 trillion. 4.3 trillion, and this is a moderate estimate. So think of climate action as investment and not expenditure. How much do we need? $300 billion according to the United Nations, $300 billion by 2030. That's what we need to tackle climate change. By 2050, this bill could rise to $500 billion, which brings us to something called a damage and loss fund. Climate change was driven by rich countries, the historical emitters. They must pay for the damage and loss. How much? $100 billion a year. But they're not paying. As of last month, they'd paid less than $10 billion. less than 10% of the 100 billion they promised. Yesterday, COP28 adopted this damage fund. Rich countries pledged millions to help poor nations. The UAE pledged $100 million, as did Germany. The UK pledged around $60 million. The United States committed $17.5 million to the fund. For perspective, this is the same America that has spent more than $50 billion on the Ukraine war, but $17.5 million for climate action. And this is also the world's biggest polluter. And these are just pledges as of now. We'll have to see how many of them walk the talk. The COP28 summit ends on December 12th. Now let's tackle the biggest issue at the COP28, climate financing. The most pressing concern, who will pay for the green pivot? How do you fund the transition to green energy? The developing world needs money, more financial support and more resources to make the shift. But the developed world is not bringing the funds to the table. They make promises and they break them. Today is just day 2, as you know, and we already have a new proposal, something called the debt for nature swaps. What does that mean? It's basically a financial agreement where a country's national debt is forgiven in exchange for protecting the environment. And who is backing this idea? The world's top multilateral development banks like the World Bank, the European Investment Bank and the Asian Development Bank. Reports say they're preparing to launch a task force. And what will this force do? Scale up the debt for nature swaps. Reports say the plans are yet to be firmed up. We'll have to wait till Monday to hear the specifics, but serious discussions are happening. So how will this debt swap work? Let me explain. Say you're a country in debt. You took a loan from a multilateral lender, but you're unable to pay. You decide to avail this debt swap. Here is how it will work. Your lender will bring in a buyer. It could be another country or an environmental organization. They will buy up your debt, but at a discount. So your debt is not all forgiven, but the overall loan burden will reduce. After the transaction is completed, your old bonds will be replaced with new ones. And these new bonds will be different. They will have new terms and conditions, hard commitments on protecting the environment, like the conservation of barrier reefs, rainforests, or other precious habitats. So like any honest debtor, you'll have to fulfill the new terms, pour more money into environmental projects and meet the new loan requirements. So if you're not investing in climate change, your new lenders will make you do it. They'll force you to do it. But is this even viable? The supporters of this strategy say this swap is a powerful tool. It gives debt relief while fighting climate change. That's their argument. But would countries with fragile economies, like Sri Lanka for instance, agree to this? With their limited foreign exchange reserves and their dependence on bailouts? Put yourself in their shoes. If you are in financial distress, where will you spend your money? Towards your survival or fighting climate change? The debt swap is a novel idea. Some countries have tried it as well, like Ecuador and Belize. But these deals have had a limited impact, and the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, agrees. Consider what they said last year. A swap cannot restore solvency to a debtor country unless it involves a sufficiently large share of a country's debt and substantial relief. So far, no swap has come close to achieving this. And that's an indictment. Clearly, these swaps won't be enough. And honestly, they are a distraction from the real issue here, the lack of climate financing. Rich countries have done little on this front, like the United States, Canada, Japan, and countries in Europe. They have 12% of the world's population, but in the past 170 years, they have released more than 50% of all greenhouse gases. Clearly, they need to fund the green transition. They did promise to give $100 billion every year, but they aren't paying up. Let me show you an estimate from 2020. Instead of $100 billion, they spent about $24 billion, not even 25% of the promised sum. How will they fill this gap? They're offering debt swaps, planning to fight climate change with more loans. The developing world should not fall for this trap. They must unite and compel rich countries to put their money where their mouth is. Meanwhile, in China, officials are struggling to rein in the new outbreak of disease, the walking pneumonia. Now, the whole world is concerned, and images from China do not inspire confidence. Take a look at this. These pictures emerged last week. These are Chinese health workers dressed in PPE, or personal protection equipment. They were disinfecting streets and classrooms. And where is this video from? The Hebei province. And this has led to widespread alarm, and for obvious reasons. The last time we saw something like this was when the Wuhan virus spread. China was the epicenter of a global pandemic. And now locals in Hebei are living in fear. They're worried that the days of strict lockdowns and mass tests could return. So what are Chinese officials saying? As always, they're downplaying the situation. They're telling the world there is no reason to be worried.
We're very concerned about the pneumonia cases in China. Are you concerned about opening up the country to foreigners without visa regarding this? And thank you.
China has a fully fledged medical system. Recently, we have seen some clusters of flu cases among children in certain parts of China. In fact, that is a very common phenomenon in many countries, and in China, that has been put under effective control.
There are long queues inside medical centers. Children are doing their homework in hospitals in China, yet Foreign Minister Wang Yi says the situation is under control. There are few who believe him. China is still trying to bring new cases under control, but the disease continues to spread and new hotspots are emerging, some of them far away from China. In Denmark, the Netherlands and the United States of America, children are falling sick. How many cases? Right now, the caseload is not too high. Just over 500 in Denmark. In the Netherlands, out of every 100,000 children, more than 100 are infected. And similar numbers are coming in from the US as well. Ohio is the hotspot there in America. Now, since the beginning of fall, a county in Ohio has seen more than 100 cases. Sweden, Switzerland and Singapore have seen cases as well, but compared to the rest, these outbreaks were quite small. Most patients are reporting the same symptoms: fever with an infection in the lungs. But some patients have a cough too. Most experts are going with China's theory here. These are cases of Mycoplasma pneumoniae. Now, this is a bacterium, and it is most common in children. But it spreads just like the Wuhan virus through droplets in the air. So when an infected person coughs or sneezes, those around the patient can catch it. The bacteria can linger in the nose as well as the throat. If it spreads to the lungs, it can cause pneumonia. The infection is likely to be mild, but the symptoms can last for weeks. In some patients, they can remain sick for months. The good thing is no deaths have been reported, but sadly, most of the patients are children. Their young immune systems are more susceptible to this infection. Adults with better immunity need not worry right now. This outbreak is not as deadly as the last one. But it has exposed China once again. Beijing has learned nothing from the past. From the SARS outbreak in 2002 to the Wuhan virus in 2020 and now this. China's response remains ineffective and obscure, and that leaves the entire world vulnerable. Now let's shift our attention to Gaza. Israel is bombing the strip again. The truce with Hamas has expired. Early this morning, rockets were fired again. Israel is blaming the Hamas for this. It says Hamas violated the terms of the ceasefire and it refuses to release more hostages. So Israel has decided to retaliate. This time, southern Gaza is also being targeted. The Israeli army dropped new leaflets there today. They're asking people to leave. Dozens have died in today's attacks. So will there be more bloodshed in the days to come? And what does Israel want from this new phase of the offensive? Our next report explains.
Israel is pounding Gaza once again. The intensity remains the same. But in this phase, Israel's chasing different goals. In Gaza's Khan Yunis, new warnings have been issued. Today, the locals woke up to this warning. It declares Khan Yunis is a dangerous fighting zone and that the locals must move to a shelter. For them, this message was a sign.
What we are feeling is that the worst is yet to come, and it will be big.
It wasn't long before their fears began to materialize. There was heavy gunfire and shelling, with aircraft and drones hovering over Gaza's skies again. Reports say Israel's forces struck the north, central and southern parts of Gaza. The fighting resumed early this morning. Israel claims it was provoked by fresh rocket attacks.
This morning, after a 7-day hostage release pause, having failed to provide a list of more hostages for release, the Hamas army of terror in the Gaza Strip violated the terms of the agreed framework and launched rocket fire at Israeli communities.
Israel and the Hamas haven't left the table. There are still signs hinting at room for diplomacy, but mediators like Egypt and Qatar have a tough job. They are struggling to find another opening. Israel says the Hamas is still holding a number of hostages. About 140 Israelis could still be in Gaza under the control of the Hamas fighters. Netanyahu has called for their release. This week, he vowed to continue the fight. He's chasing 3 goals.
Free all of our hostages, eliminate Hamas till the end, and to ensure that we won't face such a threat from Gaza ever again.
Netanyahu's political rival Benny Gantz is on the same page. Gantz is part of the war cabinet. He backs the idea of a wider military operation, one that covers the entire Gaza Strip. These messages could be grandstanding, but for now Israel has resumed attacks on Gaza. The Hamas says this new offensive has America's backing.
There was a hidden intention for the Israelis that was accompanied by an American green light, and the Israeli side resumed bombing Gaza this morning.
A new ceasefire for now is a long shot. The Hamas is said to be using the hostages as leverage. Reports say Hamas wants Israel to release more prisoners. This should include some senior Hamas members. But for now, Israel seems unwilling to pay that price. Any negotiation requires some give and take. But for the moment, no side is ready to blink first. Bureau Report, Firstpost.
Now let's talk about a different type of conflict, politics. Politics can be as dirty and dangerous as war, but apparently not in Indonesia. The country is going to polls next February. 200 million Indonesians will spend part of next Valentine's Day at the voting booth. And their presidential candidates are going to absurd lengths to woo voters for the big date. The election is turning out to be a 3-way race. The candidates are all established politicians. 2 are former governors, 1 is the sitting defense minister. But despite their political offices, their campaigns are anything but solemn. Anies Baswedan is the former governor of Jakarta. He's campaigning on cats. He has 4 cats and they have their own Instagram page with thousands of followers and millions of views. This former governor is hoping that his cats can claw him up the opinion polls, because he needs the helping paw. He's currently trailing. Ahead of him is this man, the Indonesian Minister of Defense and Dance, Lieutenant General Prabowo Subianto. He's been dancing his way to the top of the polls and into the hearts of young Indonesians. Subianto is famous for his happy dance. He's been breaking out the moves at major campaign events. Now, this man is 72 years old and he does seem quite charming with his awkward steps. It's endearing him to young voters. Too young to remember his past. The past of a genocidal general and dictator's son-in-law. That was Subianto. You see, this is not his first attempt to get power. He's tried everything before. He joined the military and rose up the ranks. He married the daughter of Indonesia's brutal dictator Suharto. Subianto was deployed to suppress the independence movement of Timor-Leste, a country Indonesia had taken over in the 1970s. Subianto is accused of war crimes during his time working there. And the brutality was not restricted to Timor-Leste. Even at home in Indonesia, the general is said to have kidnapped and tortured activists, those who wanted democracy. This was in 1998, weeks before the dictatorship fell. After the restoration of democracy, Subianto was dishonorably discharged from Indonesia's military. So he joined politics. In 2008, he founded his own party. He stood for the presidential election and lost. First in 2014 and then again in 2019. He lost to Indonesia's current president, Joko Widodo. But Subianto refused to accept his defeats. In 2019, his supporters caused a riot where 8 people died. Then he joined Widodo's cabinet as Minister of Defense. And this is a very brief look at the dancing defense minister's past. Of course, he denies all of this and dances past all the criticism. He spent some time carefully cultivating his new cuddly persona. And he's using it to win over Indonesia's young voters. The country has 200 million eligible voters. Almost half of them are under the age of 35, too young, like I said, to remember Subianto's brutal past. And they're also more likely to see his viral TikTok dance videos. It's the perfect situation for him. Plus, he has a controversial running mate, helping him attract young voters. Subianto's vice president is Gibran Raka Buming Raka, the eldest son of President Joko Widodo. He's 36 years old. Indonesia's constitution says he's too young to contest for vice presidency. But his father pulled some strings and he's become Indonesia's youngest vice presidential candidate. So this Indonesian election may look cute on the surface, but it seems to be covering up the dangers to its democracy. We'll have to wait to see if voters look past all of this, or whether the general's Javan jig gets him to Jakarta. The wait is over. The Tesla Cybertruck is here. It was announced in 2019, but then there were delays, missteps, and even morbid statements by Elon Musk. But it's finally releasing 4 years later, and that too at a hefty price. In 2019, it was priced at $39,900. Right now, it's selling for a whopping $60,990. That's close to double the original price, and yet the Tesla Cybertruck may not make a lot of money. Elon Musk says it will take at least 18 months for the truck to be a significant cash flow contributor. Our next story tells you why.
In 2019, Tesla's lead designer took to the stage. It was the unveil of the Cybertruck. He had a metal ball in his hand. He threw it at the truck. It was supposed to be a demonstration of the bulletproof glass. But the glass broke. And along with it, Musk's dreams also came shattering down. His beloved Cybertruck was now a meme. It's all people talked about. 4 years later, Franz von Holzhausen got a chance at redemption.
Now, you may remember an incident 4 years ago. Didn't quite go as planned. And Franz, maybe we should try it again.
This time, it did not look like a metal ball, more like a basketball. He threw it at the truck. The glass did not break, and that's all that mattered.
Yeah, great. I mean, I think we could probably have a pro pitcher love it if it still work. So anyway, the glass is tough, basically. That's what we're saying. So you don't have to worry about like rocks hitting the glass and cracking the glass. This glass is basically rock-proof.
The release of the Tesla Cybertruck comes years after it was planned.
Welcome.
Elon Musk first announced it in 2019, and it caused quite a stir. The prototype evoked the world of Blade Runner or Mad Max. It generated curiosity and buzz. Even if it wasn't universally loved, it has since been Musk's passion project. And the billionaire loves to boast about it. He says it's stronger than bullets and faster than a Porsche.
I should say tougher than bullets. Tow pretty much anything. Faster than a 911 while towing a 911. So, and deliveries begin now. Thank you.
Musk is giddy at the prospects, but not everyone is excited. And that's because of the price point. The electric truck starts selling at $60,990. And this isn't even the original price. The original price was $39,900. Which means the selling price will be almost double. So will the Cybertruck be a money spinner for Elon Musk? The answer is no. It's selling at a ridiculously high price, but it won't make much money until 18 months later. Musk said it himself. Analysts have also called it a high-risk project. It may look very cool, and you may feel like a hero driving it. But the vehicle's unusual styling poses problems, especially the large flat plates of unbent stainless steel. It makes it very difficult to maneuver. Does that mean it'll be just a niche product? Musk says ramping up sales will take time, at least until 2025. But the Cybertruck could still be a success. Because it's exactly what Musk likes. It's big, it's unique, it's Tesla, and it's grabbing attention.
Now let's talk about the Horn of Africa, the easternmost part of the African continent, home to countries like Somalia, Ethiopia and Kenya. In 2020, a drought gripped the region, the worst of its kind in 4 decades. It devastated the already impoverished region. Now, these countries are finally emerging from it, but there is no joy because they're grappling with a new climate catastrophe. Drought has been replaced by deluge. Torrential rain is wreaking havoc across East Africa. Waters are tearing through entire villages. Nearly 300 people have died, over 2 million have been displaced, and over 4 million people are going hungry, including 1.5 million children. And the rains are not over yet. Here's a report.
3 years ago, East Africa was gripped by an unrelenting drought. This was the worst drought in 40 years. The Horn of Africa was left devastated. This region includes countries like Somalia, Kenya and Ethiopia. It's one of the world's most impoverished regions, also one of the most climate vulnerable places, despite a fraction of the contribution to global warming. The drought had a catastrophic impact on this region. Livestock starved, crops shriveled, water insecurity increased. 20 million people were plunged into food insecurity. Tens of thousands of people died. 3 years on, prayers have been answered. The region is slowly emerging from the drought, but this is hardly a cause for celebration, because the Horn of Africa has gone from drought to deluge.
During the drought, we were able to walk to get food. Now there is nowhere to walk. Due to the flood, we have water, but we cannot drink it or fish in it.
Torrential rains began in October this year. They sent waters tearing through entire villages, washing through streets, damaging homes, bridges, schools and hospitals. According to newly released UN data, over 2 million people have been displaced across the Horn of Africa. Almost 300 people have been killed. There are fears of disease outbreaks, including cholera and malaria. The situation is bad, but it varies across countries. Burundi, Sudan, South Sudan and Uganda are all bearing the brunt, but Somalia, Kenya and Ethiopia are the worst hit. This is a once-in-a-century flooding in Somalia. 1.7 million people have been affected. At least 100 have died. About 4.3 million people are going hungry. 1.5 children under the age of 5 face acute malnutrition. In neighboring Kenya, at least 136 people have died in floods. 460,000 people have been displaced.
We feared that our children would drown in the floods because paths in the village have been washed away. There is water all over, and we found ourselves trapped with our animals. So we ran here with the children where it's safe.
Meanwhile, in Ethiopia, the situation is difficult but in a different way. Northern Ethiopia is still suffering from drought, but the southern and eastern parts of the country have been hit by flooding, due to which over 600,000 people have been displaced and at least 57 people have died. Somalia declared a national emergency in October, but Kenya fell short of doing the same. There is anger among people, especially as governments are scrambling to find money to help those in need, leading to less action and more political debates. Like in Kenya, where discussions of allocation of funds for flood victims have led to disputes. There's no question, though, that these countries need more funds to tackle the floods. And they need it fast, because by the looks of it, the flood is not going away anytime soon.
We have currently a confluence still of the Indian Ocean dipole, of El Nino. We have a cyclone building up in the Indian Ocean. We have rains continuing in the highlands of Ethiopia. All of that means that this is not over and it's not yet at its peak. It's getting worse and these people are going to suffer more.
At this point, East Africa needs a miracle to tide them over this devastation, because the rains aren't over yet and a flood of problems await the Horn of Africa.
Now let's talk about Taiwan. The self-governed island is going to polls next month. It's being painted as a fight for Taiwan's future. On the one side, you have the current ruling party, the Democratic Progressive Party, or the DPP. It has governed Taiwan since 2016, and it is hated by powers across the Taiwan Strait. That is China. China has been trying everything to dislodge the DPP. It regularly calls them separatists and threatens war with Taiwan.
Currently, Taiwan is facing the critical choice between the two paths and prospects of peace and war, prosperity and decline. We hope the vast Taiwan compatriots can have a clear idea that Taiwan independence workers are troublemakers and war makers, and that a pair of candidates both advocating for Taiwan independence is a harmful combination for Taiwan.
So China keeps threatening the people of Taiwan, telling them to vote for any party but the DPP. It also warns of punishment. China hints that it will punish Taiwan if it votes for the DPP, and that's obviously election interference, the blatant kind. But China has been interfering in more ways than one, in subtle ways as well, like subsidized travel. 22 Taiwanese people are currently under investigation. This includes 6 former and current elected officials. They are being probed for accepting money. From whom? Beijing's Taiwan Affairs Office. These 22 suspects are accused of taking hundreds of people to mainland China, taking them on trips paid for by Beijing, and then coercing them to vote against the DPP. So who paid for these junkets? Apparently China's Taiwan Affairs Office, the department that deals with Taiwan. It took the visitors out about town with an escort of Chinese officials. Basically, Beijing is accused of bribing Taiwanese voters, rolling out the red carpet to influence them. And what were these Chinese officials in the junket doing? Not just handling logistics and giving moral support. They allegedly gave speeches against the DPP. They spoke about how people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait are one family. Well, I've never threatened to bomb my family members, but perhaps Beijing looks at family differently. There's one thing everyone seems to agree on, though. The next election is crucial, though not in the way that China seems to suggest. Beijing's warmongering is worrisome, but Taiwan's ruling party says things will not really change. This is from the outgoing president, Tsai Ing-wen. She believes there will not be a war, not anytime soon. She says China is too busy dealing with internal problems to go to war. She also believes the international community will be there for Taiwan and prevent it from falling into Beijing's hands, no matter which party is in power. That's the ruling party's pitch. The status quo won't change. The opposition in Taiwan do not feel that way, though. They've come across as conciliatory when it comes to Beijing.
While the relations between China and the US and cross-strait relations become ever more tense, We all agree that maintaining the status quo and striving for peace is the biggest common denominator between the US, China and Taiwan. The people are the foundation of a country. While striving for peace, the people are the bottom line in my heart. This doesn't change now, and it will never change in the future.
We will definitely win back the Republic of China so that the people of Taiwan can be at ease and healthy.
You can see why China wants them in power instead of the current government. Will the people of Taiwan abide by Beijing's wishes? We'll find out next month. When two countries sign a diplomatic agreement, what is the basic requirement? To be a real country. And to know whether the counterpart is a real country too. It's common sense, but as they say, common sense is not that common. The Paraguayan government signed a memorandum recently with the United States of Kelasa, a fictional country, established by a fugitive Indian self-styled guru. Now, the Paraguayan official who took this decision has been replaced, but he's hardly the only government or the government official to be duped. Nation after nation has been scammed by this fictional country. Our next report shows you how.
Recently, Paraguay signed a memorandum of understanding with the United States of Kelasa. Paraguay agreed to explore diplomatic relations with Kelasa and support the admission of Kelasa as a sovereign nation. Meanwhile, Kelasa would offer help to Paraguay too, in a variety of issues, including irrigation. Sounds like a pretty good deal, right? With give and take from both parties. But there's just one issue. Kelasa isn't a place at all. It's neither a city nor a country. It's supposed to be the great cosmic borderless nation, a revival of the ancient enlightened Hindu civilizational nation which is being revived by displaced Hindus from around the world. All this is according to its website. But let's be real, Kelasa is a fictional place set up by this man, Nityananda. He claims to be the living embodiment of the Hindu god Shiva. That may be true, but in La La Land. In reality, Nityananda is a self-styled guru, a self-anointed god-man. He's wanted in India on several criminal charges, including the abduction of children, forceful collection of donations, and the rape of his disciples. So in 2019, he fled the country and established his own island nation, Kelasa, reportedly off the coast of Ecuador. Currently, his whereabouts are unknown, but his popularity hasn't taken a hit despite his alleged criminal behavior. Over the past 2 decades, he's amassed thousands of followers. He claims to have extended so-called campuses on 150 countries, where adherents practice meditation, yoga, and a new form of Hinduism which is centered around Nityananda's miraculous powers. He claims to have delayed sunrise and taught cattle how to speak Tamil. It's all quite bizarre and a bit cultish to say the least, but that doesn't stop Kelasa from extending diplomatic efforts. During the signing of the memorandum with Paraguay, this man was in charge. That's Arnaldo Chamorro, the chief of staff at Paraguay's agriculture ministry. He thought Kelasa was a South American island, but guess he should have done his homework because now he has admitted to being conned and he's been replaced after social media mockery and a nationwide scandal. But Chamorro isn't the only one who was fooled. Earlier this year, Kelasa managed to participate in a UN committee meeting. It was held in Geneva. Kelasa has also scammed its way across the United States and Canada, with local leaders signing agreements with them. For instance, in March, Newark City Hall in New Jersey signed a sister city agreement with Kelasa, but later acknowledged that they'd been scammed. It's all quite embarrassing, and the second-hand cringe is real. One would imagine that while signing formal agreements, the bare minimum requirement is to know whether a country is real or not.
And now it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. In Italy, Mount Etna lit up the sky over Catania, shooting bright red lava at dawn. In New York, shirts worn by Lionel Messi at the 2022 World Cup are expected to fetch a record price at an auction. And even sharks got treats for Christmas as Saint Nick went on a festive dive. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1955, Rosa Parks refused to surrender her bus seat to a white passenger. This was in violation of the segregation laws in Alabama. She was later arrested. This led to a 381-day bus boycott led by Martin Luther King Jr. Leaving you on that note, thanks for watching. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.